and welcome to the show, Steve. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Steve, from our brief interaction, I can tell we could talk for days about our shared passions. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time. So let's break this down. You told me about your role as a caregiver for your parents. So let's start there. Can you give us a brief background on your parents?
Sure. I've been a caregiver for my mother for about 25 years. She recently passed at 91 in December, but I'd taken care of her and laundry and groceries and all of those sorts of things, as well as getting her off the floor for many years. And my father, I wasn't a primary caregiver. I was a secondary caregiver in that in support of his wife, I learned how to execute peritoneal dialysis, and I had to do insulin and all the things he needed medically so that she could get a break. So I spent a lot of time doing that kind of stuff, but I wasn't the primary caregiver per se. But a lot of years. So with my mother since about 2010.
Gotcha. At what point did you become the primary caregiver for both of your parents?
So I was never officially the primary caregiver for my dad because he had a wife that was a registered nurse. And my role in that environment was to provide her time away. So I spent a lot of time as the primary caregiver in the moment, but it wasn't my responsibility month after month, just in giving her break time and time away. She actually had a job and she had some other things she had to do. So I filled in for all of that in her case.
Got it. Okay. So in your experience, what was the most difficult part of being a caregiver?
Well, the heartache, right? So you really want everybody to be comfortable and happy and not in pain. And there's nothing you can do as much as we can do to care for our loved ones and give them what they need and make sure all of their needs are met. You can't really change the fact that bodies deteriorate and the discomfort that goes with it, and dementia comes in, and one moment you're talking to somebody that you know and they know you, and another minute you're talking to somebody and they don't know you, and I still know them, but they don't know me. And so that heartache is the most difficult part completely. The ability to provide care and service, it comes naturally in most humans. And so in my case, the worst part was not being able to do more for them while they were suffering.
Yeah, the heartache is definitely a hard piece of it. Something I always encourage, or I try to be mindful of, is when I'm training a family on how to provide care for their loved one. As an occupational therapist, I'm always trying to make sure I also address the caregiver's stress and burden and emotional capacity to make sure that they're also taking care of themselves, because they can't take care of their loved ones if they can't take care of themselves, right? So
that's correct. The caregivers actually take care so well. We're burying the caregivers and finding new caregivers for the people who need the care. It's a very difficult situation, especially in the mom and pop situation where you have elderly parents and one's taking care of the other and doing their best, but it's a grind on them and it's very difficult. So I can empathize with anybody in the situation, and whatever we can do to help, we all want to try.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some key myths that you've heard specifically related to falls when it comes to adults and older adults?
Say that again.
What are some key myths that you've heard related to specifically falls when it comes to adults and older adults?
Well, the myth is that we can teach people how not to fall. We can make them have their houses safer. We can provide tools and appliances and things to make that work. The myth is that they're not going to fall, because it doesn't matter how much you do. People lose balance. They have a little neuropathy in the feet, or they lose a little balance from an ears, or they need a plethora of reasons why they fall. And they're going to fall no matter how much we train and how much we change houses. They're going to fall down, and we have to get them up. And the problem isn't so much falling, because 94% of all falls don't actually incur an injury worthy of a medical need. But the people that can't get up are in a difficult situation. And that's the problem, is getting up.
What was your experience with falls with your parents?
Well, my mother, for somehow or another, was a a habitual faller. She started falling in her late 50s, and out of the, she could get up sometimes, but then her knees got to be bad and she couldn't get up anymore. And for the last 30 years of her life, when she fell over, she had to have somebody help her until, of course, we made a machine that allowed her to do that on her own. But she fell regularly. She fell and the car ran over her. She fell and landed on her head and ended up in a trauma center because they were afraid of a brain bleed on her head. And she fell one time and she broke her shoulder. She fell over 30 years. She fell dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and only out of all those times, 3 of them ended up causing her to be in the hospital. But the rest of the times, she just got up, or we helped her up.
Right,
But
right.
my father was a similar situation.
Yeah. We talk a lot about falls, kind of like you mentioned already, from detection to prevention, but seldom do we talk about fall recovery outside of a usual therapy session. Why is it so important that we educate and encourage adults and older adults about the importance of fall recovery when it comes to especially aging in place? A lot of people want to stay at home, and that makes fall recovery very important, right?
Yeah.
So, why is it so important?
Well, in fact, everybody wants to stay at home. Nobody that I've ever met is looking forward to go to a convalescent hospital or a place where they're going to care for them. They want to stay at home. They're comfortable in their own homes. And then one of the primary reasons that people are forced out of their own homes into care facilities or convalescent homes is because they can't pick themselves up after they fall. And if they've got to call the 911 EMS folks more than a couple of times, they get county services involved, and they go and they talk to them and they say, you can't stay here anymore. You have to go somewhere that they can take care of you. And nobody wants that to be the case. Everybody wants to stay at home. We have to find a way to get them up. And I had an aunt that fell down a number of times, and the last time she fell down, nobody knew about it. And it was 2 weeks before they found her, and she never got up that last time. And that was the end of her life. And I have a couple of aunts that they would fall from, one was wheelchair bound, and she would fall from her wheelchair transferring to the bed or to the toilet. And then she couldn't get up, and the fire department would come and they'd say, oh, no, you look a little peaked. Let's take you to the hospital and check it out. They'd get there and she'd have a UTI or something, and she'd be in a hospital for 3 days. And because she was so weak, then they wouldn't allow her to go home. So they put her in a rehab for 30 or 40 days. And what started off as I just fell transferring from the commode to my wheelchair is now 45 days later and $150,000 in expense that brings me back home in the same place I was. And it didn't really change anything. And so fall recovery is a really important component of that, of life and living independently. And that's why I'm here today, because my parents needed an independent way to live at home, and I couldn't find a solution, so I made one.
I love that. And you're so spot on with your description of how a simple fall could land you in the hospital and then into rehab for a prolonged period of time. And then you go home and the cycle just starts again, right?
That's right.
You mentioned this already, and about why you focus on fall recovery. There are plenty of new technologies out there every day with detection and prevention goals, but you specifically started a company focusing on fall recovery. And why did you find that so meaningful, on top of course, your parents being able to pick themselves up off the floor?
Well, the reality is falling is something that's normal and people do and will continue to do. But as we have better science and better health, we live to be older. There's happens to be 17 million people in the United States that are over 85 years old. And those folks all want to stay at home. And getting up after a fall is a very difficult challenge for those who are somewhat weak because we're now in our 80s or in our late 70s, or we've got some minor disease, something that doesn't keep me from living independently, but it causes me to lose balance and fall once in a while. And the real goal is to get folks up as soon as possible, because it's not the fall that gets them, it's staying on the ground for too long that gets them. And bodies start to shut down. And once those things happen in an elderly person, You may get them up off the floor, but you may not be able to stop the process that's already begun. So fall recovery immediately or as soon after as possible is the best answer for getting people on their way. Everybody wants to get back on the way. And in most cases, if we can get them up off the floor, they just continue on with their day. And it's no longer a horrifying experience. My experience was horrible with my father, who fell so many times. The fire department picked him up so many times. He was black and blue from picking him up. And then he would scream and holler. And it just tugged at my heartstrings that I couldn't do anything for him while the fire department, the only way he could get off the floor, were there picking him up, hurting him. And then my mother fell 6 times in 4 weeks. And I tell the story that I think God pushed her down because he knew that if I had to go pick her up enough times, I'd find an answer. And I created an answer because she couldn't get up by herself. And we made a machine that allowed her to be independent at home and get up. And that changed her whole attitude about living alone because she felt like if I fall, I can just get up. It's no problem. And that was the most satisfying moment in my career in helping people was to have my mother call me and say, I fell, but I got up because your machine picked me up and I didn't have to have any help. That was something that was a defining moment in my future of wanting to help people because now they can stay at home and we've given them a tool that is able to leave them safe and independent with their dignity at home. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. You mentioned a little bit about EMS, and I know you feel pretty strongly about how your equipment helps with the EMS safety. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when we started thinking about picking up people, I realized my parents were on the floor. And then after talking with us, we found that millions of people end up on the floor. Well, most of those folks don't have a family network or a family that's close and their neighbors can't pick them up. And so they end up calling 911. And now this has become a giant problem for society, and that the emergency medical services folks who should be out working on car wrecks and people that are actually medically in need are spending much of their resources going out to pick people up off the floor. And it's a good service that they provide, but it's taxing on their resources. And with up to upwards of 20% in some regions of the EMS calls going to lift assists, that's using massive amounts of public resources. So we wanted to help the firefighters and the EMS folks, so we built a machine they could put on the fire truck and they could take with them. And when we've got somebody on the floor, they can roll the machine over to them, tilt them on, push the button, and pick them up. Now, nobody gets hurt. The patient doesn't get hurt. The firefighter, the EMS folks don't injure their backs. And there's an epidemic of injured healthcare workers from trying to help people that have fallen. And now we have tools that we can do that. All it took was a new piece of technology applied specifically to the need. And now we can avoid injury. We can avoid massive amounts of calls to care facilities who call the fire department or EMS 3 or 4 or 5 times on some days. And by providing the right tools, eliminating the opportunity or the possibility of being injured for the care provider or the patient/resident, we solve the problem. And now all we have to do is implement it so we can make it better for everyone.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Excuse me. Something you mentioned last time when we spoke was more so the fall recovery and its implications on healthcare workers and EMTs. It's so well documented, right? And even our OSHA guidelines specifically prohibit the manual lifting of patients. And so there's so many states and organizations with safe patient handling laws, and those often forbid caregivers from lifting those patients off the ground and floor. And so I think this is where what you've created is working towards that of meeting those laws and regulations and challenges of healthcare workers injuring themselves. And so that brings us kind of to your journey from caregiver to inventor. So following your caregiver role and your passion for fall recovery, you invented IndeeLift. Tell me about that.
Well, I couldn't. I had both parents under different sets of circumstances falling down, and we couldn't get them up. And we tried a Hoyer lift, and the Hoyer lift is kind of scary. You're on there's this sling, and you're swinging on it, and it takes two people officially to operate, and actually three people under worse conditions. And and it doesn't fit in the home. And the only thing that we had was a device like a Hoyer lift that was never intended to pick people up from the floor. It was a transfer device from a bed to a gurney to a wheelchair back to a bed. But now they've adapted it to pick people up off the floor. But it became, since it wasn't designed for that job, it was not the safest way to do things. And there's a number of folks that have been injured on Hoyer lifts because the people that are working with it, there's not enough people, they don't understand the rules, and people get injured. So I had to find an answer. There wasn't one. And I thought, well, I'm a creative kind of guy. I've been building telecommunications infrastructure for 35 years. I've got all the tools that it takes to invent anything I need. So I invented a machine to do that. Although it wasn't as easy as I thought. I had 5 different iterations of machines that failed miserably before I actually got a design that did the job. So I did go from I need to solve a problem and all of a bunch of iterations trying to make it right to actually having a machine that was self-operable so that my mother could pick herself up off the floor. And that was the journey went from I need to solve a problem to solving a problem and finding that the rest of the world has this problem. And if we do it right, we can help a lot of people. And that's why I became an inventor of this specific device.
Awesome. How'd you sell this problem to your investors?
So it ends up being that everybody has an aunt or a mother or an uncle or a cousin or somebody who's fallen down and they can't get up, whether it's caused by a disease like Parkinson's or a neuromuscular disorder like inclusion body myositis or muscular dystrophy. Everybody knows somebody that had to call the fire department to get up. So when I went to people that said that I was trying to get some money to start a company, I went and I explained what I did, and everybody said, "Oh no, I had to pick my mother, and we had the fire department out, and everybody." So everybody that was interested at all has some skin in the game because they have somebody in their family that I just had to pick up my brother the other day. We had 911, and my neighbors at Parkinson's that we've been over 4 times a week to pick him up off the floor. So everybody understands the problem exists, but nobody really focused on how do you solve the problem, and solving the problem is the picking up part, right? Everybody's going to fall, or the people that fall are going to fall, but getting them up is the key. And so now we have a machine to do that. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, and I think I see that your machines are patented.
They are. We actually, so along with the desire to solve the problem, what I had was unique and different that nobody ever had. So we filed some patents and we ended up with 2 US patents and 1 European patent currently in place. And we have 2 more patents working through the system right now because our mousetrap is a better mousetrap. There wasn't any device built specifically to pick people up from the floor. And now we have a device that's that way. And we do have a patent. And I'm not all that interested in keeping others from being able to provide these kind of solutions, but I've been validated as a inventor by the U.S. Patent Office because they gave me patents. They said your device is very unique and it is what it needs to be, so we're giving you that patent. And so I'm a happy guy with that. I'm not so sure that the patent is going to be so helpful, but what is helpful is the attention that we're getting now because of the need is becoming the forefront. In 2018. OSHA rewrote the regulations on safe patient handling, eliminating manual lifts. You must use mechanical devices. And the hospital spaces use hundreds of thousands of dollars on every floor to put lift devices that run along the ceiling and try to pick people up, but they still don't go in the bathroom and they still don't go on the floor down in the hallway. So our device is something that can be used in any of those places and solve the problem. So we build them for people at home, we build them for care environments, we build them for caregivers in hospitals and acute environments, and we build them for EMS. So it's really turned into a very interesting business, and everybody who uses a machine and avoids getting injured has nice things to say about what our machines do.
That's awesome. And I think you said I don't that you don't think the patent matters much, but I think it validates the idea and the creation you've created. That it's something
Certainly.
that hasn't been done before, and you're solving a problem that is going to only get worse in the upcoming few years, right?
Right. Well, we have 65 million Americans that have turned 65 in the last 4 years. I happen to have turned 66. We don't have places to put folks. If as we get older and our bodies start to deteriorate, we want our quality of life to be there. We want to be independent. We don't have any place to take care of these. We don't have people to take care of these folks. So we have to provide tools that allow people to maintain living in aging in place. And that's what everybody wants. I love my home. I want to stay here till I'm gone. And I'm going to stay here till I'm gone, come hell or high water. And now one of the main reasons that people can no longer stay at home, we can solve that problem for a few bucks. We can make it so you can stay at home. And if you can't help yourself anymore, your loved ones or their neighbors can help you, and you can be independent and not be told, we're going to have to put you somewhere where they can take care of you. And nobody wants to hear that.
I'm nodding my head at everything you're saying because you're spot on. I mean, that's exactly what we address and talk about all the time. And it's really nice to know that there's something on the market that's not manual and that's not the hammock. And, you talked about this earlier, but one of the biggest things I hear in the hospital when we do, unfortunately have to recommend that families start using a lift to get their loved ones transferred safely, their biggest concern or fear is that they don't want to be hanging in the air, right? And I don't blame them. I don't want to be hanging in the air. I don't like to hang in
Well,
the
if we
air.
want to be hanging in the air, we'll go to Disneyland. And we want a thrill, we'll go someplace that they made the thrill. We don't want that thrill in our comfort of home. We want to be comfortable and safe at home, and mostly independent.
Right. And the other part of that is that a Hoyer lift or lifts similar to Hoyer lifts, where it's a hammock system, they frequently require at least two people to operate. And so when we're talking about people living in their homes independently, it's not often that there's more than one person available to help, let alone even one person to help, right? And so you're also addressing this need or this barrier of having enough hands on deck to be able to safely assist the person.
Right. So our device was patented as a self-operated device because I needed my mother to be able to get herself up without calling somebody, and my father to do the same. And the idea was it's self-operated, and while it doesn't come to you like a vacuum cleaner or Roomba vacuum cleaner, you can't call it and say, come here, machine. Most, or not most, many people who are living alone, they live in apartments, they can centrally locate this device somewhere where if they can scoot over to the telephone to call for help, they can scoot over to this machine and pick themselves up. Now, of course, it's much more comfortable if my wife or my husband or my partner or my neighbor or somebody that lives with me, a caregiver, can roll the machine over to me if I've fallen, and I can get on and pick myself up. But in most situations, people were ambulatory to begin with. They just fell down and they've got bad knees, or they've got bad hips, or they've got a little extra weight, or they've got something that's made them, or they're just elderly and they don't have the strength. If they can scoot over to the machine and push the button, it'll pick them up and they're on their way in moments, in contrast to waiting around, first calling the family who then can't get you up, who calls the neighbors who can't get you up, who ends up finally getting EMS out. We can avoid all of that. A scary, harrowing experience that, by the way, if you're the person on the floor that can't get up and you struggle and struggle and struggle to get up, you're exhausted and you're frustrated and it's very difficult. It is truly a psyche breaking kind of moment. This machine just eliminates that. And so it's just a simple solution, but it eliminates all of the stuff, the negative stuff that goes with having to get up after a fall.
Are there plans to adapt or improve the technology so that it is available to call it, like you said, for them to press a button, maybe that goes on their wrist or on their necklace where they can press it and the machine can come to them?
So the technology is there to do that today. And while it would our devices are heavy duty industrial strength durable medical equipment, and they're heavy because they need to pick up heavy people, and we could make that machine smart enough to go from room to room in your house or to go to wherever you happen to be by programming it. That all is possible, but the cost of that drives the machine cost so high that it's cost prohibitive and people won't pay for the price. And right now we're working at doing our best to get the prices down to where they're affordable, because insurance companies, while this is one of the most important things to keep insurance companies from spending money on ambulance rides and hospital visits and rehab, they don't support people staying at home independently by providing those tools. And so we do have progress with Medicare. They're working on some HCPCS codes so that our devices can be prescribed for those folks who actually have a falling problem related to any number of different disorders, medical disorders, or physical anomalies. And eventually, the insurance companies will realize that if they give these machines to folks who fall, they avoid tens of thousands of dollars worth of costs every year, because the people can be independent and nobody wants to go to the hospital. Nobody wants to go to the rehab. Everybody wants to stay at home. And once they finally figure that out, they're going to be handing them out like candy, because it's changing the way people live at home independently. And with our 65 million people that are getting older and older and older, in the next 10 years, we have to have a solution. We're there now with that solution, and it's almost as cheap as we can make it, and we're cheap, as inexpensive as we can make it. It's not cheap because they have to do the job. And by the way, it has to work when you need it. So it's got special batteries. It's got a way to plug it in and operate from that. All of the things it takes to make people safer at home and be able to solve this problem for themselves was the goal of these machines. And we've accomplished that goal.
That's awesome. You talked a little bit about Medicare. One of my questions is that many individuals may hesitate to purchase equipment that would ultimately help them, but they can't afford it. What is your experience with that, and how do you circumvent it or help those that are less fortunate obtain the equipment that they need?
So there's multiple approaches with that. To begin with, we've been working with Medicare for almost 3 years now, and only in January of this year did we finally get a notice that our application for new medical health codes that apply to our devices is in the review stage. So sometime this year or next, we're going to have Medicare able to pay for these devices. In fact, Medicare Part B will pay for, via reimbursement up to 80%, will pay for these lifts in the case of those with ALS, with inclusion body myositis, with muscular dystrophy, with muscular sclerosis. We've had a number of successful applications and paid for machines for those the kind of diagnoses that come with falling and needing to recover. So while we don't get everybody reimbursed right now, at some point, if the doctor recognizes that you're going to fall and you need to weigh up safely, they're going to be able to just write in the right code, and the people will be able to get our machines, and it will help them up. And it will help them up this week and next month and in 6 months and in the next year. And what they will have done is they will have saved the insurance companies tens of thousands of dollars every year, because they won't be using services that were only forced on them because they couldn't get up off the floor.
What are some of the other ways? You mentioned Medicare's one.
So Medicare is one. Some private insurers are working with it now, and our company is focused on helping people. And so we use refurbished machines, and we use used machines, and we work with a number of organizations, Rotary and the MS Society and the MS Foundation and Parkinson's Resource Organization. And we work with a lot of different organizations whose goals are to help people stay independent and who participate in helping with the purchase of this kind of equipment. So when people come to us and they say, I really need it, but I can't afford it, we find a way to help them get it, whether it's through service organizations and service clubs or the actual associations that are out there intending to support the humans that are afflicted with their specific flavor, whether it be Parkinson's or MD or MS or cerebral palsy or or any kind of groups. There's 500 different neuromuscular disorders, and they're really difficult to diagnose. But they all have the same problem. When people fall down, they can't get up. And so we capture a solution for a whole plethora of medical conditions, all with a simple little device. But that's, by the way, the fact that there are 500 different neuromuscular diseases, along with osteoarthritis and just plain old bad knees and bad hips and being overweight. One solution fits all of the causes. And that's a beautiful thing. It's like aspirin used to be the thing we did when we took it because of whatever. If you hurt here, you hurt there. One thing did it all. Well, now in the case of falling, we have one little answer that just solves it for everyone. It's a beautiful thing.
That's awesome. Do you have any relationships with the Veterans Administration?
We do. We've been working with the Veterans Administration since March of 2018 because Veterans Administration is a federal organization that has to comply with the OSHA guidelines. OSHA came out with a new set of safe patient handling guidelines in 2018, and the Veterans Administration immediately reacted to how are we going to meet these requirements. They started working with us, and they've been prescribing, the Veterans Administration has been prescribing our machines to wheelchair-bound and disabled and amputees and a variety of reasons that veterans have a need because of falling. We've delivered hundreds and hundreds of machines to veterans paid for by the Veterans Administration because they recognize that if we can get the veteran up off the floor back into their wheelchair at home without calling 911, then we save a lot of money and we save a lot of pain, and everybody's happier. Safer makes happy.
Yes, 100%. If you're safe, then you're most likely going to be happy.
Happier, even in there. You might be in pain. You might have to suffer some, but if you're not worried about falling over because you can't get up, that's one less thing to worry about.
Yeah. It also helps the family members and caregivers get a little bit of a peace of mind too, right?
Well, not only does it help them get a little peace of mind, but for a caregiver to be able to roll a machine over and help somebody up safely without worrying about injuring that person or the caregiver, that's just a beautiful thing. People don't really understand this, but people that fall down have a tendency to fall down, and they're going to fall down over time more and more times. We had one paraplegic in Florida that called for EMS 122 times in 1 year. And the fire department said, we got to fix this. We're sending this truck and these 3 guys to pick them back up over and over and over. And they contacted me, and we worked with them to get this person a machine that would help them up on their own. We trained them on that. And in the first year, they went from 122 calls in the prior year to 12 calls in the year that they had a machine. And now that person deteriorated further in it, and they needed to not be independent anymore because that's what ultimately happens. But for the period of time that person was able to use it, he no longer called for EMS and was happy that he could take care of this problem on his own, because nobody really wants the fire department to have to come knock your door down and drag a bunch of guys in to pick you up off the floor. Well, there are some little old ladies that like it when the fire guys show up because they're cute. But that is not a good answer for a medical need.
Yeah, that reminds me of the story you shared about humiliating moments when you have to call EMS and you're maybe not exactly in the right physical state, right? Especially if there's falls in the bathroom after a shower or before a shower, and that's probably a great case use example of that.
Absolutely. So it ends up being that my mother fell all those times I mentioned. She fell a lot of times in a very short period of time. The last time she fell, she had to call 911 because I was out of town. And she did, and they came, but they had to break into her house because, like most people, she locks her doors. So they broke into her house, and then they found her. She was on the floor between her bed and the bathroom where she fell. She didn't make it to the bathroom, so now she was a mess, and she was just the most humiliated person to think that there are these four guys off this fire truck are standing over her to try to pick her up. And it took them 30 seconds. That wasn't a problem, the timing, but she did not like that. And she told me, I'm never calling 911 again. I'm going to wait till you come home. I'll just call you. I'll just wait on the floor till you get there because I am not going through that again. And she, by the way, is a perfect example where she walked around like she was walking on eggshells because she felt so much she was afraid to fall because that means she has to call somebody. I made a machine for her. We put her in her home. She didn't fall for 9 months. No, it's a fall prevention device. It's a wonderful thing. But then when she finally fell, she called me up and said, Steve, you got to come get me because I fell on the floor. And I didn't get the call right then, right away. I got another call about 3 minutes later, and she called and said, Steve, never mind. I scooted over to that machine you built for me, and I put my butt on it. I pushed the button, and I got up all by myself. And that was the first time in 20-something years that she got off of the floor by herself. And I was just elated. Well, so didn't take long for her to fall again. And she fell again, and she called me and says, I'm just calling to tell you that I fell, but you don't really have to do anything because I scooted over to that machine and I picked myself up. And at that point, she was 83 years old and now able to get up where she had not been able to get up by herself for her whole life. And now she could get up off the floor by herself because we gave her a tool. It was just a fabulous moment.
That's wonderful. I'd just like to highlight that with these machines, it's wonderful that they can get themselves back up, but it's also important to remind them that they still need to call and tell somebody that they fell in case there's some sort of injury or unseen injury that we want to get checked just to make sure nothing's actually wrong. But then you're eliminating the factor of laying on the ground until somebody shows up, right? So you're decreasing the chances of further injury.
Right. Well, for further injury to not only the person on the floor, but the people that are trying to help them get up. And the reality is, while they may be bruised and they may be sore from a fall, 90 to 95% of the falls don't actually incur an injury that requires medical attention. And they know if they're hurting. And if they need services beyond that, it's much better to be sitting in a chair comfortably waiting for somebody to take me to the hospital than it is for me to be laying on the floor in pain because I can't get up off the floor. So it's a helpful tool no matter, even if you have an injury later. People injure their shoulders and their arms. You still have to get them off the floor. And picking them up is, if you've got injured arms, how do you pick somebody up off the floor like that? Well, our device picks them up at the torso, so that's not a problem. And it's eliminated those related issues as well. So it's, people are going to fall. We need to help them up.
Yeah. So you mentioned the US and you mentioned a European patent. What countries are your lifts available in?
So we actually have a distributor in Canada, a couple of them. We have a master distributor in Australia that covers Australia, New Zealand, and Tasmania. In fact, we just shipped them a whole container full of machines because they're finding such a great need and it's solving the problem. And we also have a European office in Barcelona and distributors in the UK and in Germany and in France and in Italy. And we have a couple of medical providers that actually cover all of the European Union. So they're not specific to a country, but they are able to support folks across the European Union. And of course, we get orders from people in India and from people in Dubai and from people in the US Emirates and all these different places. They buy our machine, but we don't have presence there yet. But we did, because of cost of manufacturing in America, we had to go offshore with manufacturing. And now we can deliver a product anywhere on the globe that is efficiently packaged, meaning all of the recyclable requirements and all of the technical requirements for each of these individual environments. And in Europe, I couldn't sell a machine until I became an official medical device manufacturer. So I had to go through a process to become a licensed medical device manufacturer. And then they were willing to look at my devices. So after 18 months to become a medical device manufacturer, having to have an engineer on site and all the things it took, they finally started looking at our device. And now we have a CE certified for medical application use called an FTS 400 that is being sold across Europe and in the United States and in Australia and in Canada and everywhere they need them. We now have a medically certified device, which is a little more inclusive than our normal home device. So we have a less expensive home fall recovery device because millions of people need it at home. But now we have, for those with real medical conditions and getting funding via the social services or insurance, we have a machine that is actually certified and meets the requirements. So there's no insurance company that can say, oh, no, it's not medically certified, we're not purchasing it. So we've met those obligations as well. And that's across Europe, which, by the way, the CE certification in Europe is valid globally.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
So one of the things, a lot of these decisions that are made about who's helping, what kind of products are being used to help, is this help being received, tend to be cultural in a lot of households. Have you encountered any firsthand experiences in regard to cultural differences when it comes to fall recovery and or even equipment purchasing? And if yes, how did you navigate that?
So my experience has been that people that fall and need to get up span every demographic of humanity, from causes that are from youthful people that have disease or disabilities to elderly folks that may be in really great shape otherwise, but they have a little Meniere's syndrome and they fall down because they lose their balance. And it doesn't matter what culture or what environment you're from, getting up off the floor is still getting up off the floor. So while people are less likely to spend $1,000 on a machine to pick you up if there's 5 people in the house that can help, that doesn't solve the problem of injuring the fallen person or the people that are picking them up. So it's really about need. And if you're a person who lives with your husband or your wife and you can't help your partner up off the floor and they have a falling problem, this machine is something that people are willing to purchase, as evidenced by, you can go to Google IndeeLift reviews and hundreds of reviews will come up about how I can now take care of I'm now elderly and my wife is elderly and we're taking care of our disabled child who's now 40 and we just can't pick him up anymore, but this machine helps us do that. And so across the board, people explain why in their situation, however unique it is, our machine helps them. And that's a very gratifying thing that folks, they come to me and they call in and they talk to our customer service folks and say, well, just thank the guy who invented it because this just changed my life. And who'd have thought that a simple little device to help you off the floor was going to be so important to the health and well-being of people trying to live independently? Who knew? If we knew, somebody would have invented it a long time ago, but we didn't know and we invented it anyway. And now we get the benefits of the result.
And that's a wonderful story for you to share.
Yes, I'm happy to share.
Now, as we wrap up,
mostly we just want to
I'm sorry, say that again.
Mostly we want to make sure that people are aware that the tools exist because they're making tough decisions about putting somebody that they love in a care facility. And if this is the cause, we can keep you at home, and everybody wants to stay at home.
Yeah. As we wrap up, what is one takeaway you'd like the audience to consider as it relates to fall recovery from a caregiver standpoint?
Well, caregivers really want to help. That's why they're caregivers. But they are at risk over and over again. Every time they have to manipulate a patient, they're at risk of injuring themselves and the patient. In fact, the caregivers are the folks that end up in more pain than the people they're caring for because they're doing everything they can to help. And so my message is, if we can give the caregivers the tools to make them and their patients safer, that we need to tell the world that. And that's why we're here talking to you today, because the folks that are really providing the care, they need to know that these tools are out there that can help them. We have walkers, we have canes, we have wheelchairs, we have tools to help everybody. We have special bathroom seats, we have special showers, we have special this and special that. And now we have a fall recovery device because it's not falling, it's a problem, it's getting up. And now we can solve that. And so for caregivers, please know that this is there and never get yourself injured again because we can solve that problem.
Thank you, Steve, for this wonderful conversation and our shared passion for public education and awareness around falls and safety with caregiving.
Thank you so very much for having me. Have a nice day.
Thank you.